Sentra, honey, I'm home.
Oh, close. How was work?
Stressful, but we're getting there. Thanks for making dinner. You didn't have to do that.
I enjoy it. It's kind of therapeutic, you know? Besides, you can pay me back later. Never mind, don't worry about it.
And she was never heard from again.
Ugh, that's terrible.
Yeah, maybe we should have researched just a bit more before we moved here.
Well, it was a long time ago. I doubt the others know about it.
I could probably mention it in the sermon tomorrow.
Oh, that reminds me. I actually have a friend coming over tomorrow. Maybe she's heard of it?
In other news, 3 pastors have gone missing.
What was that?
I have no idea. Wait, stop.
You know you like it. You owe me for dinner, sexy.
I'm so sorry, honey. I don't think I can tonight. I'm seriously tired.
Oh, yeah, I understand. Sorry. I really didn't mean to force it.
It's not your fault, honey. You know I love you just the way you are. Do you remember that book we read together about the accelerator and the brakes? I think I have those sensitive brakes. Maybe another night?
Okay.
What is consent? According to the American Sexual Health Association, consent is defined as an agreement that is willfully given without any external pressure or factors. When it comes to sexual activity, no concept or idea is as important to understand as consent. Yet, it's often skipped over as part of American sex ed programs. Sexual consent means that all people involved in a sexual activity clearly and freely agree to participate. You can give consent by words or actions, but your intent should be clear. Make sure you understand the concept of consent before you have sex. The age of consent. Before you become sexually active, it's important to know the age of consent where you are. I don't think it needs to be said, but when it comes to adults, your partner needs to be a legal adult. But since so many of us become sexually active before the age of 18, let's just be honest here, the age of consent is important to know. It differs based on where you live. In the United States, the lowest it goes is 16, but this isn't true for every state. In Texas, it's actually 17. In New York, it's 18. Why is something as fundamental as sex not a federal law? You'll see as we go along that sex and sex education is a highly politicized issue and is usually determined by the state. Other countries vary from age 21 all the way down to age 12. Except this one island where it's 0. Some countries still require you to be married before you can consent to sexual activity, usually due to religious customs. Make sure you know what it is wherever you're located. Sober consent.
Bear me, baby.
Unfortunately, a lot of people, at least in America, tend to schedule their weekly sex venture right after getting kicked out of the bar on a Friday night. Hey, I'm not here to judge, but I am here to tell you that your partner cannot consent to sex if they have alcohol or drugs or both in their system. In order to properly agree to sex, your judgment has to be sound. Since alcohol and drugs impair your judgment, it doesn't count. But what if we're both drunk?
Oh, that's a great idea, sis. Why don't you shut up?
Remember how I said victims of unwanted sexual contact often experience trauma? When you're drunk, you agree to things you know your sober self wouldn't agree to. You agree to something that hurts you, and when you sober up, the experience is traumatic, even if it doesn't seem like it in the moment. Sober consent isn't just to protect you from legal recourse, it's also to protect your partner. Not to mention, we're more likely to engage in unsafe practices when we're drunk or high, which increases the risk of pregnancy. Trust me, make a habit of sobering up before sex. Continuous consent. This one isn't talked about all that much, and I'd be surprised if it was very common. It is still really important though. Consent must be continuous. What does that mean? Well, at every step of the way, your partner or partners agree to every activity. Just because they consented to the initial offer of sex doesn't mean they consent to any and all sexual activity. Also, just because someone consented yesterday doesn't mean they consent today. Even if someone has consented 100 times, it does not mean they will consent the 101st. Anyone who's experienced unwanted anal sex will know what I mean. This unfortunately happens to a lot of women. They consent to vaginal sex, and halfway through, the guy decides to try the other hole.
What a hole!
No, you need new consent if you switch up your actions. Besides, everybody has that one thing they just don't want to try. If your partner tries something without making sure you're both comfortable with it, you have every right to just stop it right there. I mean, you always do regardless, but especially so. Consent isn't always verbal. You might be surprised to hear this, but it's actually true. Consent isn't always verbal, and it doesn't have to be. This is something that I actually got wrong in my first batch of videos, one of the big pieces of misinformation. Now, don't get me wrong, verbal consent is undeniably the best, but if we're being realistic, not everybody vocalizes their willingness to participate. Because of this simple fact, it's important to know how to give and how to pick up on clear nonverbal consent. We'll cover this more in detail later, but just know that if you're going for the safest route, a verbal yes is the best way. Enthusiastic consent. You know what's even better than a yes? Consent should be enthusiastic, excited, happy. You don't have to scream from the rooftops just how much you want to get fucked in the ass, but showing that excitement will dispel those doubts that you're actually up for it. For example, you just came back from a nice dinner with your boyfriend. You're both pretty tired, but you're up for a little freaky if he is. You ask, hey, you want to do it? He says,
Fine.
that's not consent. Even though he agreed to it, he's not really up for it. For the sake of the relationship, you should wait for the enthusiastic yes. And don't try to push your partner to get that more enthusiastic yes. If they're not excited the first time, then they might feign enthusiasm. I know this can be kind of confusing and there's a lot of gray areas with this rule, but you really know it when you see it. Now, it is true that some people just have sensitive breaks when it comes to sex. If you haven't read Come As You Are by Emily Nagoski, I would highly recommend it. I don't agree with some of the ways she tends to give out this very gendered idea of sex, but one concept I think is fantastic is the analogy of the accelerator and the brakes. Someone with a sensitive accelerator sees the potential for sex in the little things. Their partner in a cute outfit, their partner taking good care of the kids, that kind of thing. It's really easy for your brain to enter sex mode.
Not when I shift into maximum overdrive!
Someone with sensitive brakes, on the other hand, needs to be extremely comfortable in order to get in the sexual mood. And they might agree to it unenthusiastically because they know they'll enjoy it once they get into it a little bit. I'm simplifying here, but in any case, it's best to communicate with your partner about their wants, needs, and normal levels of enthusiasm. The most important thing is to get to know your partner. Get to know how they tend to agree to things. When in doubt, get that verbal consent. Arousal does not mean desire. This was a huge part of the training that I'm taking. Just because, let's say, a man or somebody with a penis has an erection, that doesn't mean they're consenting to the activity. Just because someone with a vulva is wet down there doesn't mean they actually want it. It's actually been shown that women or people with a vulva will actually get wet when they see somebody getting sexually assaulted. And researchers believe that it's actually a defense mechanism because, unfortunately, their bodies might have learned that I'm probably next. I need to be wet so I don't get hurt. Yeah, it's really depressing stuff. But the point is, just because your partner is aroused doesn't mean they're saying yes. A consistent definition of sex. This was a huge argument that I had with a girl in college. They were not my sex partner, it was just a friend. And you know, all power to them for having a stance and defending it, but I disagreed with their opinion that a blowjob isn't sex. Now, whether or not you define any sexual contact as sex It's important to be on the same page about it with whoever's ass you're pounding.
Start pounding, Joker.
Right? Let's say you think a blowjob is sex. Great. Your boyfriend takes you out to that nice dinner, he takes you home, you're feeling a little spicy. He immediately undresses you and tries to put his dick in your butt.
Whoa, 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 whoa.
You see what I mean? You don't have to go through the entire list of sex-related activities pre-coitus, but you should prioritize communication, especially if it's your first time with someone. I mean, you saw earlier how much the age of consent varies by region. Imagine how different the definition of sex is. The US Department of Justice defines sexual activity as A. Contact between the penis and the vulva, or the penis and the anus, that involves penetration, however slight. B. Contact between the mouth and the penis, the mouth and the vulva, or the mouth and the anus. C. The penetration, however slight, of the anal or genital opening of another by a hand or finger or by any object, with an intent to abuse, humiliate, harass, degrade, or arouse or gratify the sexual desire of any person. D. Intentional touching, not through clothes, of a minor person under 16. Penetration may be proved by indirect or circumstantial evidence. It is not necessary that the penetration of the genital and anal openings be complete, and emission is not required. A very extensive and thorough legal definition, but if you just Google what is sex, Wikipedia gives you sex, more formally known as sexual intercourse, coitus, or copulation, is an intimate social activity typically involving the insertion of the erect male penis inside the female vagina and followed by thrusting motions for erotic pleasure, biological reproduction, or both. It's actually a pretty limited definition in comparison. It's important to agree what's okay and what's not okay in the bedroom. Let's be honest, I mean, young people can't even agree on the sober thing. Some young people say drugs and alcohol can help reveal a person's true self and desires. Others say you can never give consent if you are not sober. Several young people said the type of substance being used can impact whether or not you can consent. They said, for example, alcohol and marijuana can affect you differently. You can see why a lot of people avoid having sex purely out of fear of doing it non-consensually. This is something I brought up in my training with other people, that a lot of guys are just afraid of sex because they're afraid of being accused. But you shouldn't be afraid of it, it's just important to be good at communicating before you start. And you can improve over time, it's okay. All of the fear, it can be avoided with good communication. The number of girls out there who do, false accusations, I don't know the actual number. They say it's real low. And I just want to stop being afraid of it. But that's just me, personally. Sometimes you just get lonely enough and you get over the fear. Fully informed consent. Damn, this list just keeps getting longer, doesn't it? Well, there's a few other things that you should disclose before diving into sex. When was the last time you were tested for an STI? STIs, formerly known as STDs, are sexually transmitted infections. We left out the D because you're basically calling someone diseased, and we decided that infection was just a better term. If you have any STIs, or if you had one in the past, even if it completely went away, it's your responsibility to say so. It's really, really not cool to keep that from your sexual partner. It could also open you up to legal recourse if you contract an STI and you didn't tell them. We'll cover STIs in greater detail down the line, but you should know that even with antibiotics and modern medicine, some STIs are still life-threatening. Yeah, they can literally kill you. So yes, you need to tell them about your history. I don't know the actual legal, definitions and whatever. If you get an STI and you have sex with somebody and they die from it, you could be held responsible. You should also inform them of any birth control that you are or are not using. Ladies, if you're in bed with a guy, he would really, really appreciate it if you disclosed that information. Thank you. Examples of sexual coercion and manipulation. I think it would be helpful to read you some examples of manipulative tactics, because it's hard to see it coming unless you know what it looks like. Sexual coercion and manipulation. When a person makes another feel like they owe them sexual contact. For example, "But I bought dinner. We've been together for so long." I've been waiting all day for this. You've already got me turned on. Some sex is transactional. That is allowed, and it can be done in a healthy way, but this is not one of those times. You never owe someone sex, no matter what they've done for you. When a person gives excessive, insincere compliments to get another to agree to sexual contact. For example, "You're so sexy, I can't control myself around you. I've thought about it, and I think you would look good naked." Now, obviously you can incorporate these things into your sexy talk and your foreplay, but it needs to come after the consent. And it is better if it's just part of a fantasy. Those examples that I gave, "I think you would look so good naked, I can't control myself," this is something that, admittedly, a lot of douchebag type guys will do. First, they love bomb you to make you feel like you have to pay him back. Don't fall for it. When someone badgers, yells, or holds a person down to have sexual contact. This is sexual violence, plain and simple. No matter the gender identity or sexuality, it can happen either way. You'd be surprised how many gay men have been sexually abused just because they're men and because they're gay. There's a stereotype that when you're gay, you're supposed to be down for sex whenever. Not true. Even in a straight relationship, if the woman holds the man down for sex without his consent, it's still sexual violence. I actually had somebody that, I don't know them personally, but I, have heard of this person. They actually got pinned for this, and they were a woman. So it does happen, and it does get prosecuted. I'm not trying to take this point away from the women that do experience sexual violence because they experience more of it than men, but it's not a competition. A lot of men simply won't seek help and they won't report it because, unfortunately, sexual violence against men specifically is still largely not seen as legitimate, even when it's an underage person. But you have to remember, and this goes for pretty much everything on this channel, every lesson that I tell you, what we're discouraging is the action, without regard to identity or sexuality or race, anything. It's the action that matters. Now, we'll cover gender differences later because there's differences in biology, but when it comes to behavior and what we expect out of people, it's all the same. When someone gives or persistently encourages the use of drugs or alcohol to loosen someone up, like, let's liquor you up. Nope, this might happen at a bar. Someone puts something in your drink. Make sure you keep an eye on it. When someone pressures or threatens another to agree to sexual contact because they're in a relationship. For example, "If you love me, you would do this. If you don't have sex with me, I'll just go find someone who will." It's really emotionally manipulative. If they try to pull this, they don't deserve you. When someone reacts with sadness or anger when somebody else says no. "If you don't have sex with me, you don't really love me. You're a slut anyway, so what's your problem with me?" You're allowed to be sad or disappointed that your partner isn't up for it. That's understandable. But you can't use that to guilt trip them. That's when it becomes a problem. And, the people pleasers out there have to be careful about this kind of trap. When someone continues to pressure another when he or she says no. For example, "I am just gonna tell everyone we had sex anyway, so we might as well." That's blackmail. Get out of that relationship ASAP. When someone claims they need it or normalizes expectations. "Oh, guys just need it. You're gonna give me blue balls." I mean, come on. He deserves blue balls if he's doing that. Other non-consent. In today's world, a higher importance is placed on care for the mentally disabled. It really doesn't need to be said, but somebody who has a mental handicap that significantly impairs their decision-making can't properly consent. Now, I'm going to avoid going into too much detail on this specific one until I do some more research. I gotta define what is and isn't categorized as a handicap. I do know that sex on the spectrum is possible. I'm not calling autism a disability per se, I just know this question will inevitably come up when talking about consent. Remember, it's called on the spectrum for a reason. Autism is a highly individualized experience. And if you or someone you're with is at all autistic, that's a conversation you should have. Generally speaking, if they can't give their full judgment, you can't really do it.
Got a pre-existing juvenile foundation relationship. Statute 2705-3.
What? Texas statute?
Special laws. It might surprise you to know that even though a common age of consent in America is 16, there's a few special laws carved out for individuals aged 16 and 17 specifically. It's the most common time to lose your virginity, so defining what is and isn't consensual is really, really important. According to rapecrisis.org, which is a UK-based organization, yeah, but since the US tends to follow UK laws, it's important to know. It is illegal to take a photo or video of someone aged 18 or under engaging in sexual activity, pay for sexual services from someone under 18, take part in sexual activity with someone under 18 if you are in a position of trust. For example, you're their teacher, social worker, doctor, or care worker. Take part in sexual activity with someone under 18 if they are a member of your family. So the 16 being the age of consent doesn't count. These are special exceptions to age of consent laws. Even though most of them seem pretty obvious, remember that the only reason these exist is because someone did them, and then argued in court on the grounds of age of consent. Since many of us become sexually active in that time frame, it's important to know what is and isn't kosher. Gendered consent. Okay, I promise I'll try to keep this one as brief as possible. It is possible for a man to be sexually abused, and we can't excuse it on the grounds of, he's a guy, so he probably wanted it anyway. Don't even get me started on that gay men stereotype, being down for sex no matter what. I already kinda said it, it's a whole video. Abuse is abuse, no way around it. Now what does change with gender is the way in which consent tends to be communicated. And I think it's worth keeping in mind the stereotypes that are still unfortunately present in most sexual encounters. According to the traditional sexual script, people who identify as women are more likely to be the gatekeeper in a given encounter and thus accept or rebuff a male initiator's attempt for sex. Based on these stereotypically gendered roles, both women and men tend to describe sexual consent as something men get from women. Because women are reinforced as gatekeepers and subsequently experience inhibited sexual agency, they tend to communicate their willingness to engage in sex relatively less directly than men. Evidencing this, Willis and Hunt found that men were more likely than women to use explicit verbal cues relative to implicit nonverbal cues. This is read directly from a study in the National Library of Medicine, and if I can, I'll link it below so you can read it for yourself. What they're basically saying in that little blurb is that, generally speaking, people who identify as women tend to communicate their consent non-verbally. They tend to use implicit nonverbal cues. Now, this might be setting off some light bulbs for you. There's that old joke that women like to play games, blah blah blah. This is kind of referring to the fact that women just tend not to say it verbally. They tend to use those implicit nonverbals. Hugging, eyeing someone up and down, a brush against the leg. Now, people who identify as men tend to ask directly, do you want to have sex? Yes or no? This is where a lot of our current gender divide stems from, this one moment during sex. Women tend to communicate non-verbally, and men tend to communicate verbally. Now, write this down as my specific opinion. I firmly believe that verbal consent is by far the best way to give consent. Now, we're not going to get into my gender identity and where I land on the how feminine or masculine am I, because let's be honest, it's complicated. But what I have picked up on is a lot of men fearing sex because they're afraid of accidental non-consent. For a lot of guys, not all, but a lot, it's their top priority. And in my opinion, there's no better way of combating this fear by learning the ins and outs of consent. You know, you shouldn't have to ID check every single person you talk to and hand out surveys requesting medical information, but at the very least, familiarizing yourself with what healthy communication looks like will ensure that you're as covered as you can be. I feel so bad for young people today when it comes to sex, and I'm 23, I'm unk. People even younger than me. It's difficult and scary, but also awesome at the same time, and you shouldn't have to just live in fear of that. I did for the longest time, and I'm still working through it, but it's okay. As long as you learn about these things with communication and consent, and as long as you understand how men and women tend to communicate that consent, you'll be much better off. On a more positive note, gender doesn't determine everything. You know, it's been found that when it comes to step 1 in most sexual encounters, like massaging, men do tend to verbalize their consent more than women, sure. But when it comes to more intense activity like penetration, that gap closes, and most everyone tends to be verbal. I mean, when it comes to consent, everyone fears something. Many young men said they were afraid of being accused of rape, while young women often said they fear being raped. Youths of all genders recognized that unclear consent could create problems for everyone involved. It's in everyone's best interest to get really, really good at communicating. Consent and technology. What about sexting? This is unfortunately an all too common practice among those in my generation. Before you roll your eyes, I know sexting itself isn't bad, as long as it's okayed beforehand. Oops, it usually isn't. I have 2 sisters, and believe me, the prevalence of unwanted dick pics from randos on Instagram is actually fucking depressing, okay? It's not just the odd creep. A lot of people for some reason think it's normal to just snap a photo and send it to literally everybody.
Who posted my nudes on Twitter.com?
Sexting is something that can be incredibly hot, but it's also something that should happen when you have the consent for it already. You know, if I'm just mid-edit, editing this video, and someone just sends me a picture of their cock in their hand, I think I just throw my computer out the window. I mean, we're all pretty familiar with the booty call text, right? Come over, my parents aren't home. Well, just because someone gives consent through a text, they still have to give it in person. They might have changed their mind on the way over there. And just because you consensually sent someone a sexy pic doesn't mean the recipient of that pic is free and clear to share it with everyone. Everybody knows somebody that got a dick pic and just sent it to their friends or whoever else. Nope, that is non-consent. Consent can be hot. I'll be the first to admit, okay, this video probably made you more scared of sex than anything, and that definitely was not my intention. The truth is, something that's as quick as consenting to sex isn't usually this complicated. Use your judgment in any situation to remove any possibility of non-consent. Most situations will be you, your committed partner, someone will say, hey, wanna do it? The other person nods excitedly, then you do it. Under everything we just covered, that's totally okay. Their consent technically wasn't verbal, they enthusiastically went, they nodded. Most sexual encounters happen like that. And you know, things like disclosing birth control, STIs, knowing if they've had anything to drink, anything to smoke, those come way before the encounter, way before you have to get to the point of asking for consent. So, in the moment, just use your best judgment and speak honestly. Plus, just saying, all my certified foreplay enjoyers know that any and all parts of the sexual experience can be hot. Remember, not all consent is verbal, and you can integrate it into the sex pretty seamlessly. That enthusiastic yes, you can whisper it in their ear, sensually. Tell them what you want them to do to you. Saying non-sexual phrases in a sexual way. What do you want for dinner tonight? Sausage? I'll have some of your sausage later. Moaning, whimpering, both extremely, extremely hot ways to foreplay. And both can be part of the consent process. Kissing someone's neck? So get creative. At the end of the day, sex is just adults playing, and it's meant to be fun. And with proper consent, it can be the most fun you've ever had.
Hey, honey. Want to do it?
Can we do my favorite thing?
How about your second favorite thing? Huh?